Year 10 and 11, welcome to your analysis and comparison of exposure and storm on the island in preparation for your English Literature Poetry exam. If you need my single individual videos for exposure and storm on the island, then they are on my YouTube channel. It's probably a good idea to watch them before you try to compare, because this video is quite quick. I'm just going to highlight what you could say. I've got an example introduction and an example structural paragraph. But as I say, we're just going to highlight some things you might want to comment on. In terms of structure then, Storm on the Island uses free verse to highlight that the weather in nature is unpredictable and quite difficult to stop. There is a single stanza which proves that the island is isolated and therefore it seems more vulnerable because it stands alone. We also have enjambment, which is there supposed to serve the repetitive cycle of nature, that these people have faced this storm before, and we know that through the line we are prepared. They are prepared to face this storm, but it seems they always lose. They are always defeated, and the enjambment allows the power of the storm to be highlighted because it's difficult to stop and avoid, and it carries on, and you know the cycle of nature will always carry on. The seasons changing will always carry on. And that is linked then to the Shazera, because by pausing and renewing, we get the inevitability, don't we? Again, we get the inevitability of this island facing weather that it's faced before and will again. Storm on the Island also uses iambic meter, and that mimics the movement of the storm and this consistent experience of the island, and this idea that it's trying to withstand nature. Exposure is half rhyme, which provides a tight structure, and under the surface of the poem there's this somber mood, you know, that mankind is mortal. The regular stanzas are for a couple of reasons. We've got the progression of the poem, and therefore the suffering of the men worsens, because by the time we hit the final stanza they are on the verge of death. They lose hope and abandon God. Particularly stanzas 5, 6 and 7, where we change from nothing happens to is it that we are dying. We turn back to our dying. The love of God seems dying, and therefore we have this shift in focus from the men to the dreams to the beliefs. And the sad thing is that by the end of the poem everything's broken. Religion, the men themselves, their mentality. The irregular stanzas also show us, you know, this monotonous presentation and this monotony of life in the trenches, and further highlights the irony that they think nothing is happening when in actual fact they are dying. But nothing happens, as I've mentioned it a couple of times, is repetition or refrain, depending on what you've been taught in terms of terminology. And then we get the volta, which in my interpretation, I think the volta is we turn back to our dying, because I think that's the instance where we realise that the men are almost giving in and accepting their fate, and accepting that the only conclusion to come from this war zone is death. In terms of language, there's a lot to be said for exposure, particularly because it's so long. So I've just picked out some things you might want to mention. Don't forget, I've got an example paragraph, 2 paragraphs coming up in a moment. For Storm on the Island, we've got the personification of squat. We build our houses squat, and it refers to the people on the island. They expect the storm, and they're therefore prepared. Squat represents the structure of the building as it will survive the storm, and it's unpleasant, and it perhaps reflects the lives of the people as they live during the storm, almost cowering away. We get the violent verb pummels. It's consistent. It shows us that the people are vulnerable, and that it, you know, when you link pummels to the iambic meter, we've got this bang 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 type of rhythm, and this incessant sound, and this incessant storm. Plosive B sounds in blows, full, blast. It reminds us of a bomb. It's destructive. They can't escape it. You know, if you blows, full, blast, it's attacking the people. Abstract noun and emotive language. It is a strange nothing that we fear. Serves a little bit of irony there, that they think they don't fear anything, but actually what they fear is the weather. And usually in day-to-day life, we wouldn't say that we were scared of the weather. So I suppose to some extent there's an irony there. Oxymoron in exploding comfortably. Exploding the water is violent. Metaphor in the word exploding makes it sound dangerous and deadly. And then when we get exploding comfortably, we've got this juxtaposition of it's natural for the waves to be violent during the storm, but it's exploding comfortably because perhaps, as we've mentioned earlier, it has happened before. Nature is coming into its own in terms of confidence and tearing up this island. Exposure is there's a lot of personification, isn't there? The icy swings that knife us immediately, the opening line highlights and foreshadows that the weather is in fact more deadly than even the enemy, and actually this knives us, it penetrates them and it cuts right through them. And again, it's this instance that man is mortal. We get that in the prelude as well, don't we? And that nature will outlast us, will always overpower us, and actually to some extent we can't avoid it or stop it. We get the personification of mad gusts tugging on the wire, and the most interesting or powerful word in there is tugging, because it implies that it is incessant. It's something that sounds annoying, irritating. The men aren't being left alone. They are persistently being tortured. They're sitting in their trench. We aren't even referring to the enemy here. We are referring to the wind. And it's mad as well, mad gusts. It's personified as being something insane. And I suppose to some extent that potentially highlights the exposure that the men had to this awful experience, and the fact that a lot of them suffered mentally with what they saw and what they experienced. More personification in flakes, lingering stealth come feeling for our faces. Stealth obviously shows us that the men don't realise the danger. That links to Storm on the Island when we get that line about invisibly. They don't realise the peril and the danger and the treacherous conditions they find themselves in due to the weather. And when we link that to the weather feeling for their face, it's as if the weather is targeting them because it knows they're vulnerable and attacking them in this stealth-like manner. And don't forget, in one instance in exposure, we are told that the snow is black. So we have huge foreshadowing of death all the way through this poem. And that is the half rhyme as well, under the surface, always reminding us of the vulnerability, the fragility and the mortality of man. The personification is frost will fasten on this mud and us. It's imagery. The personification of his frost with the capital H. We can't get away. They can't escape. They're trapped. And that horrible word fasten, they can't get, it's this idea that they can't get it off. Once the weather has attacked and stuck to them, that's it. You know, I suppose it's again signalling death. It might even be a reference to God as well, this idea that God has abandoned them. A little bit more Storm on the Island. We do get the simile, the flung spray hits the very windows, spits like a tame cat turned savage. The imagery of the water spitting is aggressive and vicious. And then we get the image of the cat turning savage, which is evil. The cat changes like the weather from tame to savage. The cat is influenced by the weather. So your most domesticated, calm pet has turned into something evil, and that is the effect of the storm. It's not only pummeling the houses and ruining the trees and the land, but it's affecting even pets. We are bombarded by the empty air. We've got the inclusive pronoun we there, but look at that. Bombarded shows they can't escape, a little bit like exposure. And the metaphor here of the empty air seems ironic, because it seems as if the air is empty, it's not a threat. And that then links to it's a huge nothing that we fear. Obviously, again, we know that this empty air is vicious and violent, and it's raising up this tragic chorus and it's pummeling houses. And this last line of strange, it is a huge nothing we fear. Look at your Shazera after the word strange, because it is strange to us as a reader. I've never experienced a storm, touch wood, and therefore don't know that it's something that I necessarily fear. So this last line seems ironic. Perhaps it suggests that the ultimate power of the storm is that it's unknown, and it's unknown what's going to happen. The conclusion of it is unknown. No one knows what the wind will do and what the storm will bring. So as a reader, we think, are their fears justified? All right. An exposure, we've got the title. There's loads of meanings in the title of exposure. On one level, it reveals how the soldiers were not only killed by the enemy, but exposure to the elements, exposure to the weather, exposure to nature. On another level, Owen is exposing the myth that fighting in war was adventurous and glamorous, and therefore he's exposing the lies of the government and propaganda, which promised that these young men were going to go on an adventure and be heroes. In truth, nothing happens. The men die from the cold, insanity, and obviously the enemy. The poignant misery of dawn begins to grow, and dawn massing in the east, the days lengthen because all the men are doing is suffering. So the days lengthen and they run into one another, and it prolongs this period of pain. Your Shazera as well, if you wanted to mention Shazera in exposure, does that as well. Rhetorical question I mentioned earlier, is it that we are dying? There's a slight acknowledgement here, but there's hesitation. Is it? They're questioning whether or not they're dying. They haven't actually acknowledged it just yet, which I think happens at the Volta, where they turn to their dying. And obviously the metaphor, all their eyes are eyes. The only conclusion from this is death. And don't forget, Wilfred Owen himself did die. Okay. What could we write then in terms of exposure and storm on the island? We could write, in Storm on the Island, Heaney presents the destruction a powerful storm causes to an island. He details the bare ground, the sea and the wind, and highlights the vulnerability of man in the face of nature. Similarly, in Exposure, Owen outlines the precarious situation of World War I, whereby the men were attacked not only by the enemy, but by the natural elements, and the sad irony in this poem is that the men are unaware of the potential results. But nothing happens. Structure. With regards to structure, Heaney uses free verse to imply that the weather and nature is unpredictable and difficult to stop. This, coupled with the iambic metre, seems to mimic the movement of the storm and the consistent experience of this island as it attempts to withstand nature. Unfortunately, as the poem progresses, the Shazera is strategically placed to serve as a reminder that nature has the ability to pause and renew its cycle, and inevitably humanity is at its peril. Moreover, Heaney reiterates this with enjambment, which allows lines to run on and warns the reader of the indefensible position this island finds itself in. The utilisation of a single stanza truly emphasises the isolation and vulnerability of the island. However, Exposure is slightly different in its use of structural devices while still portraying the mortality of humanity. Half Rhyme provides a tight structure and provides the poem with a sombre mood, which lurks below the surface and supports this message of soldiers being exposed to many complications. Owen's use of regular stanzas is twofold. Firstly, as the poem progresses, the men's suffering worsens, and by the final stanza the soldiers are on the verge of death. They have lost all hope and abandoned their faith in God. Stanzas 5, 6 and 7 sees the poem shift focus from the men themselves to their dreams and their beliefs. By the end of the poem, all three are broken. Secondly, the monotonous presentation of the structure represents the tedium of life in the trenches and worsens the irony of the refrain used as the men believe nothing happens. Arguably, the Volta appears at, we turn back to our dying. Clearly, the men have almost given in and accepted their fate. This was just a quick video, as I said, just to highlight some of the things you might want to point out in terms of Storm on the Island and Exposure. Remember, they are similar in the sense that they are showing us the power of nature and the fragility and the vulnerability of mankind in the face of it. I hope this has been useful. Please go to my YouTube channel for the individual videos, and there's a whole playlist comparing videos as well. Just type my name into YouTube. It's Stacey Reay. S-T-A-C-E-Y, and Reay is R-E-A-Y, and massive good luck in your English literature exam.